On the last night of the cruise, I stood before a microphone in the ship's grand lounge, my 72-year-old hands steady. My voice even, I looked out at the sea of faces smiling, tanned, oblivious. At the back of the room, near a marble pillar, stood my son Julian and his wife Serafina. Their faces were pale, their smiles frozen in place. They thought they were coming to a farewell champagne reception. They had no idea they were attending their own execution. This wasn't a trip to celebrate my life. It was their meticulously planned attempt to end it. But they had made one critical miscalculation. They assumed that because I was old, I was also weak. They were about to learn that a woman who has spent a lifetime nurturing stories knows exactly how to write her own ending. But before I continue, check if you've subscribed to the channel, Agatha Raisin Story, and share in the comments where you are watching us from. We would love to know how far our stories of revenge reach. The story really began 4 years ago with the silence. It wasn't a sudden dramatic severing, but a slow creeping frost that withered the lines of communication between my son and me. After my husband Richard passed away, the weekly phone calls from Julian became monthly, then seasonal, then eventually nothing at all. I was left with the echoes in my quiet house in Portland, Maine, a house filled with the ghosts of laughter and the lingering scent of Richard's pipe tobacco. My world shrank to the comforting confines of the Anchor and Quill, the bookstore we had built together from nothing. It was my sanctuary, a haven of worn spines and the rustle of turning pages, a place where the stories of others filled the space my own family had vacated. I kept busy. I hosted a Thursday night reading circle for a group of women my age, all of us widows or divorcees who found more reliable companionship in Austen and Bronte than we had in our later years of marriage. I volunteered at the local literacy center, teaching adults to read their quiet triumphs, a balm to my own quiet sorrows. Life settled into a predictable, manageable rhythm of opening the shop, dusting the shelves, brewing Earl Grey tea for my regulars, and closing up under the soft glow of the street lamps. It was a peaceful existence, but a lonely one. The silence from Julian was a constant low-grade ache, a question mark hanging over the final chapter of my life. Then, on a Tuesday morning, just before my 72nd birthday, the letter arrived. It was a simple cream-colored envelope slid under the bookstore's front door. No stamp, no return address. Inside, a single sheet of high-quality bond paper held a typed message, stark and impersonal. Beatrice thought you deserved a celebration. A Bermuda cruise for your birthday. All expenses paid. Ship departs from Boston Friday at 10 a.m. Tickets at the terminal. Julian. I sank into the worn leather armchair by the history section, the one Richard always claimed because it had the best light. I read the note 10 times, then 20. My heart, a fickle and unreliable organ these days, performed a confusing ballet of leaps and stumbles. Joy sharp and piercing, followed by a cold wave of dread. 4 years of absolute silence, not even a text message when I was hospitalized with a hypertensive crisis last winter, and now this A cruise. It felt less like an olive branch and more like a summons. I called my friend Margaret, the most pragmatic of my reading circle ladies. "He's trying Beatrice," she said, her voice crackling over the phone. "Maybe he feels guilty. Maybe he's finally grown up. People change. Or maybe they want something." I countered the words, tasting like acid. And what could they possibly want? "You're not exactly a shipping magnate, my dear. You own a lovely dusty bookstore that probably breaks even most years. Go. What's the worst that can happen? You get a free tan and some terrible buffet food." Her logic was sound, yet a deeper, more primal instinct whispered a warning. It was the same instinct that told me which customers were browsers and which were shoplifters. The one that knew a storm was coming long before the sky turned gray. I spent the next 2 days in a state of suspended animation, warring with myself. One moment, I was picturing a tearful reunion on the deck, Julian hugging me, his familiar scent of sandalwood and ambition filling my senses, whispering, "I'm sorry, Mom." The next, I saw his wife, Serafina, her smile as polished and impenetrable as marble, her eyes calculating. She had never liked me, had always seen me as a relic of a past. Julian was desperate to escape. Ultimately, hope that stubborn, irrational weed won out. I wanted to believe my son still loved me. I wanted to believe that the years of silence were an anomaly, a difficult phase he had finally outgrown. The thought of mending that fractured bond was a siren song I couldn't resist. So I packed. I chose my clothes with care: simple linen trousers, comfortable cardigans, a string of pearls Richard had given me for our 30th anniversary. I packed my blood pressure medication, the small blue pills that were a twice-daily reminder of my own fragility. And at the last minute, I tucked a well-worn copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations into my bag. I had a feeling I might need the Stoics on my side. On Friday morning, I stood on the bustling pier in Boston, the salty air whipping my scarf around my face. The ship, the Azure Voyager, was larger than I'd imagined, a floating city of white steel and glass. It wasn't one of the garish megaliners, but a more reserved, elegant vessel. And there, standing near the gangway, was Julian. He looked older. The boyish charm in his face had hardened into a sharp corporate veneer. He was thinner too, as if he'd shed the last vestiges of his youth. Beside him, Serafina was a vision of curated perfection in a cream-colored pantsuit, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. Julian's smile didn't quite reach his eyes, but he hugged me, a brief, stiff embrace that felt more like a business transaction than a reunion. "Mom, you made it. You look great." Serafina offered a cheek for me to kiss, her skin cool and smelling faintly of expensive perfume. "Beatrice, it's so good to see you. We were so worried you wouldn't come." Her voice was a soft, melodic purr, but it carried the same metallic chill as her handshake. The cabin they had booked for me was a pleasant surprise. It was a junior suite with a private balcony overlooking the endless expanse of the Atlantic. The decor was tasteful, all muted blues and creams. What struck me, however, were the personal touches. On the small writing desk sat a framed photograph of Richard and me, taken on our last trip to Acadia National Park, a photo I kept on my own mantelpiece. How had they gotten a copy? On a small bookshelf were 3 of my favorite novels: Middlemarch, Persuasion, and a collection of Mary Oliver's poetry. A small electric kettle was set up on the counter with a box of my preferred brand of chamomile tea. It was all so thoughtful, so meticulously researched, that it felt deeply unsettling. It wasn't the gesture of a son who knew his mother. It was the work of a personal assistant who had been given a checklist. That first night at dinner, they flanked me at a table for 3 in the ship's main dining room. The room was a cavern of crystal chandeliers and hushed conversations. Julian ordered for all of us, choosing the pan-seared salmon without asking my preference. "It's good for the heart, Mom," he said with a paternalistic smile. When the food arrived, he carefully cut my fish into bite-sized pieces, as if I were a child or an invalid. Serafina, meanwhile, played the attentive daughter-in-law, constantly refilling my water glass and pouring me a cup of the chamomile tea from a personal pot she'd apparently requested from the kitchen. "We just want you to relax and let us take care of everything," she murmured, her hand briefly touching mine. Her fingers were cold. They peppered me with questions about the bookstore, about my reading circle, about my volunteer work. They listened with an intensity that felt unnatural, nodding at all the right moments, their faces masks of profound interest. Julian even laughed at my old tired joke about our local mayor being a closeted romance reader. It was a perfect performance. For a few hours, I allowed myself to be lulled by it. I looked at my son, so handsome and successful, and his beautiful wife, and I let the hope bloom again. Maybe Margaret was right. Maybe they were just trying to make up for lost time. Later, standing on my private balcony, the cool sea breeze on my face, I watched the moon cast a silver path on the dark water. I felt a flicker of something that might have been peace, but beneath it, the quiet hum of my intuition persisted. There's a particular kind of silence that isn't about the absence of noise. It's a silence with a sharp edge, the kind that slices through the air when words are being used to conceal, not to communicate. I couldn't put my finger on what was wrong, but some part of me, the old wise part that had lived through 72 years of life's deceptions and disappointments, remained on high alert. I went to bed that night, feeling like an actress in a play where I hadn't been given the full script. The calm was beautiful, but it was the calm of a painted ocean. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that the storm was still to come. The next morning, I awoke feeling as if I were moving through water. My limbs were heavy, my head filled with a strange cottony fog. A dull pressure had settled in my chest, a familiar but unwelcome sensation that usually signaled a spike in my blood pressure. When I tried to grip the handle of my teacup, my fingers tingled with a peculiar numbness. I dismissed it as a combination of the sea air, the unfamiliar bed, and the simple, unavoidable reality of my age. "You're 72, I told myself sternly. Things ache, things tingle. It's the new normal. I skipped the main dining room, opting for a quiet breakfast in my cabin, from the room service menu oatmeal and black coffee things I could trust. I had just finished when there was a soft knock on the door. It was Serafina, dressed in an immaculate white tennis outfit, holding a single steaming mug. "Good morning, Beatrice," she chirped, her smile dazzlingly bright. "I saw you weren't at breakfast and got worried. I brought you my special wellness tea. It's a blend I get from a little shop in Charleston. Wonderful for de-stressing." She swept into the room, placing the mug on the table beside me. The steam carried a faint, pleasant aroma of mint, but underneath it was a strange, earthy note, like damp soil after a rain. I thanked her, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. I didn't want the tea, but refusing felt like an act of overt hostility. I wasn't ready to commit. Politeness, I had learned, was both a shield and a cage. I took a few obligatory sips while she chattered on about the day's planned activities, a tour of the ship's art gallery, followed by shuffleboard on the Lido deck. The tea was warm and slightly bitter. After only half a cup, the fog in my head thickened. The world didn't spin, but it seemed to recede, the colors dulling slightly. The sounds becoming muted, as if someone had placed a thick pane of glass between me and reality. I blinked, trying to focus on Serafina's face. Her words were smooth and soothing, landing like soft pillows. "You've spent your whole life taking care of others, Beatrice. It's time someone took care of you. You deserve to be pampered." It all sounded so lovely, but the delivery felt rehearsed, like a sales pitch she had practiced in front of a mirror. Her eyes, a pale crystalline blue, held no genuine warmth. They were the eyes of a biologist observing a specimen. Then she asked, her tone still light and casual, "Are you still taking those little blue pills for your blood pressure? I just want to make sure we're not giving you anything with herbs that might interfere." I nodded slowly, the motion feeling disconnected from the command my brain had issued. As I answered, I noticed her discreetly angle her body away from me, her thumb tapping out a quick message on her phone. She thought I didn't see, but in the reflection of the cabin's dark television screen, I saw it all. My skin prickled. Later that afternoon, the three of us stood on the top deck, the wind whipping at our hair. The fresh air helped to clear some of the mental haze, but a profound fatigue had settled deep in my bones, a weariness that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. I leaned against the railing, watching the distant coastline smudge the horizon. Julian came over and handed me a tall glass of lemonade condensation, beating on its sides. "Thought you might be thirsty," he said, his hand lingering on my shoulder for a moment too long. I took a sip. It tasted off. There was a faint, almost imperceptible chemical bitterness hiding beneath the sweet and sour. It wasn't spoiled, just wrong. I smiled my thanks and set the glass down on a nearby table, turning away to admire the view. "I think I'd prefer a simple bottle of water, dear," I said, keeping my voice even. Serafina immediately sprang into action, retrieving a chilled bottle of Evian from her designer tote bag with the practiced efficiency of a magician producing a rabbit from a hat. Of course, Beatrice, it's important to stay hydrated. That evening, dinner was in the captain's lounge, a more intimate setting with candlelit tables and a pianist playing soft, melancholic jazz. I had no appetite. I pushed a piece of lobster around my plate while Julian held forth on his latest business venture, something to do with cryptocurrency and blockchain technology that was utterly incomprehensible to me. I nodded and made appropriate murmurs of interest, feeling more like an audience member than a participant. As the waiter cleared our plates, Serafina reached for the teapot that had been placed on our table. "A different blend tonight?" she announced cheerfully. "Lavender and chamomile. It's meant to aid digestion and promote restful sleep." She poured the fragrant pale gold liquid into my cup, stirred in a dollop of honey from a small porcelain pot, and slid it across the table to me. Her movements were fluid and graceful, but her eyes never left the cup, tracking its short journey as if it were a precious, fragile artifact. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic, feeling its heat seep into my skin. I raised it to my lips, tilted it as if to drink, and then set it back down on its saucer. I saw the briefest flicker of something in her eyes, annoyance before her serene smile snapped back into place. "Is it not to your liking?" she asked, her voice dripping with concern. "It's lovely." I lied. "I'm just so full from that delicious dinner. I'll drink it in a moment." Back in my cabin, the mental fog returned with a vengeance. I sat on the edge of the bed, my heart fluttering erratically in my chest, like a trapped bird beating its wings against my ribs. A sharp cramp seized my stomach, making me gasp. I lay down, closing my eyes and focusing on my breathing, waiting for the wave of discomfort to pass. It eventually subsided, but it left behind a low, thrumming hum of anxiety. I got up and walked to the full-length mirror on the closet door. My reflection looked back at me, a pale, washed-out version of myself. My skin seemed thinner, my eyes sunken. As I reached up to tuck a stray strand of silver hair behind my ear, I noticed a distinct tremor in my right hand. It wasn't the gentle, age-related shaking I was used to. This was a finer, more agitated vibration, an internal tremor that had surfaced. The wind howled outside my balcony door, rattling the glass. I drew the heavy curtains, shutting out the turbulent night. The ship groaned around me, the sounds of a living, breathing creature of steel and steam. I knew with a certainty that was no longer just instinct, but a terrifying, emerging logic that I was not safe. The meticulous care, the constant stream of special teas and drinks, the subtle questions about my health, they weren't acts of love. They were acts of administration. And the strange, debilitating symptoms that followed each offering were not the random betrayals of an aging body. They were the intended results. Someone was poisoning me. And there were only two people on this entire ship who had the motive and the opportunity to do so. The thought was so monstrous, so fundamentally unnatural, that my mind shied away from it. My own son. It was impossible. And yet, it was the only explanation that fit. That night, sleep was a distant country I could not reach. I lay awake in the dark, listening, waiting, and trying to piece together the fragments of a nightmare that I was living with my eyes wide open. The third night was the night the mask of civility finally slipped, not because of anything they did, but because of a stranger's courage. Dinner was a subdued affair. Julian seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone under the table, while Serafina's bright chatter felt strained, the effort of maintaining the facade beginning to show. I had spent the day in my cabin, pleading a headache, avoiding their company and their endless thoughtful offerings of food and drink. I ate only a protein bar I had packed in my suitcase and drank only tap water directly from the bathroom faucet. The mental fog had lifted slightly, and the tremor in my hand had subsided. I declined the wine Serafina offered and pushed away the glass of ginger ale Julian poured for me. I watched them exchange a look, a quick, almost imperceptible glance of shared frustration. The charade was wearing thin on both sides. Halfway through the main course, I excused myself to the ladies' room, Not because I needed to, but because the oppressive atmosphere at the table was becoming suffocating. The hallway was dimly lit, lined with vintage photographs of the cruise line's older ships. As I walked back, I noticed a young waitress standing near a service station polishing silverware. She couldn't have been more than 22, with dark, intelligent eyes and a quiet efficiency in her movements. As I passed her, eyes met mine for a fleeting second. There was a look of intense concern on her face, a silent communication that sent a jolt through me. When I returned to my seat, I found my napkin refolded neatly beside my plate. As I picked it up to place it on my lap, my fingers brushed against a small folded piece of paper tucked underneath. It was a torn corner from a server's notepad. My heart hammered against my ribs. With my hands trembling beneath the tablecloth, I carefully unfolded it in my lap. The message was written in a hurried, slightly shaky script. "Call 911. There is something in your tea." The air rushed from my lungs. The sounds of the dining room, the clinking of cutlery, the soft music, the murmur of conversation faded into a distant roar. I read the words again, and then a third time, as if repetition could somehow alter their meaning. My blood ran cold. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't my imagination. It was real. I calmly, deliberately slid the note into the small inner pocket of my purse. I looked up and scanned the room. No one was looking at me. Julian was texting again. Serafina was smiling at the couple at the next table. I took a slow, deep breath and folded my napkin over my uneaten food. My hands were shaking violently now, but I kept them hidden in my lap. "Are you feeling chilled, Beatrice?" Serafina asked, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. "You're trembling." I nodded, unable to trust my voice. "A little," I managed to whisper. "Let me get you a nice hot cup of tea to warm you up," she said, her smile never faltering as she signaled the waiter. The moment the cup was placed before me, I could smell it. The familiar scent of chamomile, but with that same underlying metallic sweetness, like wilted flowers and pennies. I thanked the waiter, cupped my hands around the mug for a moment, as if to warm them, and then let it sit untouched for the rest of the meal. The little white cup sat there on the table, a tiny vessel of death, a symbol of the unfathomable betrayal seated across from me. Later, locked in my cabin, I pulled the note out again. The words seemed to burn on the page. I replayed the scene in the dining room, the young waitress's worried eyes. She had seen something. She had taken an enormous risk to warn me. I wasn't alone in this. The realization didn't bring comfort, only a sharper, more terrifying clarity. My mind raced, connecting the dots that I had been so reluctant to see: the thoughtful gifts, the constant supervision disguised as care, the strange, debilitating illnesses, and now this. A direct warning. I didn't have a working cell phone. I had left my old flip phone at home, assuming I wouldn't need it. There was a phone in the cabin, but who would I call the ship's security and say what? "My son is trying to poison me with tea." They would think I was a confused, paranoid old woman. I needed proof. I didn't sleep a wink. I sat in the armchair by the window, watching the dark, churning waves, my mind a maelstrom of fear and fury. At one point, I heard soft footsteps pause outside my door, followed by a single, gentle knock. I held my breath. The footsteps retreated. Were they checking on me? Or were they waiting for me to be unconscious? The next morning, my exhaustion was a physical weight, but my mind was preternaturally sharp. At breakfast, which I forced myself to attend in the main dining room, I saw her again. The young waitress. Her name tag read Katerina. She moved through the room with professional grace, avoiding my table, but as she poured coffee for the man sitting next to me, she angled her wrist just For a fraction of a second, I saw a string of numbers written in blue pen near the crease of her thumb. A phone number? She met my gaze for a single significant moment before moving on. I had another piece of the puzzle. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a detective in the most important case of my life. I spent the rest of the morning formulating a plan. I couldn't risk being seen with Katerina. I had to find a neutral, unobserved space. Around 10 o'clock, I made my way to the ship's mid-deck cafe, a less formal self-serve area where passengers came and went with little notice. I got a cup of black coffee, one I poured myself from a communal urn, and settled into a small booth in the far corner facing the entrance. I opened my copy of Meditations and pretended to read. It took less than 15 minutes. Katerina entered carrying a tray of fresh pastries to restock the display case. Her eyes scanned the room, found me, and she gave a nearly imperceptible nod. She busied herself at the pastry counter, which was conveniently located near my booth. As she arranged the croissants, she leaned slightly in my direction, her back to the rest of the room. She spoke in a low, rushed whisper. "I'm a pharmacy student. I work here in the summers. I saw your daughter-in-law adding something to your cup from a small brown vial. Twice. I wasn't sure at first, but last night I saw it again, and I recognized the vial's shape. I couldn't. She straightened up, her movements quick and nervous. As she turned to leave, she slid a folded napkin under the saucer of my coffee cup and walked away without a backward glance. My hand shook as I reached for it. I waited until I was back in the perceived safety of my cabin. The door double-locked before I read her second message. It was more detailed this time. A single word. Digoxin. Below it, a chillingly concise warning. Can mimic symptoms of congestive heart failure in older adults. Causes nausea, confusion, vision changes, fatal cardiac arrhythmia in high doses. Get your blood tested as soon as you dock. Digoxin. The name rang a distant bell. A member of my reading circle years ago had told a tragic story about her grandson, a nurse who had used it to. I pushed the memory away. I didn't need the details. The name was enough. It was a weapon, silent and subtle, a poison that could be easily mistaken for the natural failings of an old heart. A key turned in my door lock. My own heart leaped into my throat. The door swung open, and Julian stood there, a practiced, casual smile on his face. "There you are?" I knocked, but you didn't answer. "You weren't at breakfast. Feeling all right?" I forced my expression to remain placid, tucking Katerina's note under my thigh. "Just a bit tired, dear. I decided to sleep in." He walked into the room, his presence filling the small space. He made small talk about the weather, the beauty of the open ocean, the quality of the ship's buffet. It was a verbal smokescreen designed to distract and disarm. Then he sat in the chair opposite me, and his tone shifted, becoming more serious, more paternal. "Mom?" He began, leaning forward and fixing me with a look of deep, fraudulent concern. "Serafina and I have been talking. We're worried about you. Running the bookstore all by yourself, living alone in that big house. It's a lot for you to handle at your age." I said nothing. My face a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. "We've been looking at some options," he continued, his voice smooth as oil. "There's a wonderful community in Sarasota, Florida, just a few hours from us. More of a luxury resort than a nursing home. You'd have your own apartment, chef-prepared meals, social activities. We even toured a unit on your behalf last month. It has a lovely view of the golf course." My blood turned to ice in my veins. Last month. This wasn't a spontaneous birthday trip. This was the final stage of a long-planned operation. He smiled a wide, predatory smile. "Don't you worry about a thing. We'll handle all the paperwork, the sale of the house, the transfer of your assets. We just want you to be safe and comfortable." I finally found my voice. "That's very thoughtful of you, Julian. I'll certainly think about it." My own words sounded hollow and foreign. He stood up, patting my shoulder. "That's my girl. We'll talk more later." As soon as he left, I slid the heavy armchair from the desk and wedged it under the doorknob. It was a flimsy, theatrical gesture on a ship where staff had master keys, but it was an act of defiance. It was me taking back some small measure of control. I went to the desk, pulled out the fresh notebook and pen I always traveled with, and began to write. I documented everything. Every conversation, every cup of tea, every symptom, every strange look. I dated and timed each entry. I wrote down the name, Digoxin. I drew a timeline of events, the page filled with my neat, steady script, a stark contrast to the chaos raging inside me. I was no longer just a target, I was building my case. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in my stomach, but now it was mixed with something else, a cold, hard resolve. They didn't know that I knew, and that ignorance was the only weapon I had left. It was time to pretend, time to prepare, time to survive. That afternoon, I forced myself to leave the cabin. To stay locked inside would be to concede defeat, to let them know their campaign of terror was working. I walked the promenade deck, my posture straight, my pace measured. The ocean was a vast, indifferent gray, mirroring the emptiness I felt inside. There is a unique and terrible loneliness in being surrounded by happy, laughing people while your own world is collapsing. Every smiling family, every couple holding hands was a fresh stab of grief for the family. I thought I had the son I had lost long before this cruise ever began. My heart had found a new, unsettling rhythm, a series of flutters followed by a hard, heavy thump, a physical manifestation of my anxiety. I had to consciously keep my hand from flying to my chest to check my own pulse. Panic was a luxury I could not afford. Panic would land me in the ship's infirmary, exactly where they wanted me. When I returned to my cabin, a plain white envelope had been slipped under the door. My first instinct was that it was from Julian and Serafina, perhaps the first of the documents they wanted me to sign, but the paper felt different, cheaper. Inside was another folded note in Katerina's script. This one contained no words, only a room number 212 and a time midnight. And below that, a short string of letters and numbers that looked like a code. My heart quickened. She was taking an even greater risk. And I knew I had to meet her. The hours leading up to midnight were the longest of my life. I had to attend lunch with them, another masterclass in deception. Julian brought me a bowl of soup unprompted. "It's the chef's special butternut squash," he said brightly, "full of vitamins." Serafina laughed a sound like tiny tinkling bells. "We're just practicing for when we're old and gray on a cruise ship," she said, then leaned in and dabbed the corner of my mouth with her napkin, a gesture of such infantilizing condescension, it took all my willpower not to recoil. I smiled, thanked them, and let the soup grow cold. Back in my room, I continued my chronicle. My notebook was becoming my anchor, the one solid thing in a world that had turned to water. I no longer wrote in full sentences. My entries were fragmented, impressionistic. Minty tea, head fog, numbness in hands, lemonade bitter, Katerina's eyes, digoxin, Sarasota. Last month. It was a litany of betrayal. At 11:30, I put on my darkest cardigan, slipped the note into my pocket, and eased my cabin door open. The ship was quieter now, the decks mostly deserted, save for a few late-night revelers in the casino. The ship itself seemed to breathe around me, the gentle creak and groan of the structure, a constant living sound. I walked slowly, my soft-soled shoes making no noise on the plush carpeting, my eyes scanning the long, empty corridor ahead. Room 212 was in a different section of the ship, a deck below mine. I knocked twice, paused for a beat, then knocked once more as I imagined one might do in an old spy film. The door opened a crack. It was Katerina. She pulled me inside quickly and shut the door without a word. The cabin was small, an interior room with no window lit only by a single desk lamp. It felt clandestine and safe. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. She handed me a thick manila envelope. "I have a friend who works in ship security," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He owes me a favor. He thinks I'm trying to help a grandmother who is being taken advantage of by her family." Which is true. I opened the envelope. Inside were 3 still photographs printed on glossy paper. The first was a grainy shot from a security camera time-stamped from 2 nights prior. It clearly showed Serafina at our dinner table leaning over my teacup and tipping a small dark vial into it. The second was an enlargement of a photo Julian had posted on his social media account a month ago, a selfie taken in his car. In the background, through the passenger side window, the sign for a CVS pharmacy was clearly visible. He was holding a white prescription bag. The third photo was another security still. This one of my cabin door from the previous night. It captured the faint, blurry image of someone Serafina, by her silhouette, slipping an envelope underneath. My friend said he'd send digital copies to my personal email just in case, Katerina added. He said he would deny everything if asked, but he wanted to help. I stared at the images, the tangible proof of their cold, calculated cruelty. I felt no tears, no surge of rage. All I felt was a profound, hollowing emptiness. The son I had raised, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, and whose nightmares I had soothed, was gone. In his place was this stranger, this monster. I looked up at this young woman, this girl who owed me nothing, who was risking her job and perhaps more to help me. "Why?" I asked, my voice raspy. She looked down at her hands. "My own grandmother," she said softly. "She was put in a home by my uncle. He said she was getting confused, that she couldn't handle her own affairs. We found out later he had sold her house and emptied her bank accounts. She died a year later. She just gave up. I see him in your son's eyes. I see my grandmother in yours. I couldn't live with myself if I did nothing." She then pressed a small, slim object into my hand. It was a digital voice recorder. "It's better than a phone," she said. "Easier to hide. If you can get them talking, it might be the only thing that saves you." She walked me to the door, checked the hallway, and then I was alone again in the dimly lit corridor. As I walked back to my room, a strange sense of calm washed over me. The initial storm of shock and fear had passed. Now the waters were still, and I could see my course with perfect, terrifying clarity. The real storm was just beginning, and I needed to be the one to steer my ship through it. The next morning, the ship docked in Hamilton, Bermuda. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the pastel-colored buildings of the town glittered in the sun. Passengers flooded the gangway, eager for a day of shopping and sightseeing. From my balcony, the world looked idyllic, a postcard-perfect scene of peaceful vacationers. It was a cruel juxtaposition to the war I was silently waging. I ignored the breakfast tray that was delivered to my door, another thoughtful offering from my jailers. I noted its contents in my book: scrambled eggs, a croissant, fresh melon, and a small glass of orange juice that seemed to glow with an unnatural vibrancy. I poured the juice down the sink and meticulously washed the glass. I would not ingest another thing they had touched. Julian knocked on my door around mid-morning, his voice buoyant. "Mom, we're heading into town. Want to come with us? We could find a nice little cafe for lunch." The invitation was a test. I knew I had to refuse, but I had to do it carefully. "You two go on ahead," I said, opening the door just a crack. "My stomach is feeling a little unsettled today. I think I'll just rest and read." His face fell into a mask of concern. "Oh no. Do you need me to call the ship's doctor?" No, I said quickly. "It's nothing. I'm sure it will pass. You go and have fun. Maybe you could bring me back a little souvenir. A pretty scarf, perhaps." I gave him a weak but reassuring smile. It was a flawless performance of a frail elderly woman. He bought it completely. After he left, I waited 10 agonizing minutes, my ear pressed to the door listening. When I was sure they were gone, I slipped out. The voice recorder was in my cardigan pocket. The envelope with Katerina's photos tucked into the waistband of my trousers, pressed flat against my skin. Following Katerina's last note, I made my way down to the lower crew decks, a part of the ship guests were not meant to see. The pristine illusion of the passenger areas gave way to a stark, functional world of steel corridors and humming machinery. I found the service panel she had described hidden behind a laundry chute. The code she'd given me was for the small maintenance lock. Inside the panel was a small taped-up box. I opened it. It contained a cheap prepaid burner phone and another folded note. This one had a name and a number. Janice Albright Eskurnal, my lawyer, and a message. Call her, tell her everything. I will say, I found the phone and gave it to you. I hurried back to my cabin, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. The silence of the room was a comfort. I pulled out the burner phone. It felt illicit in my hands. With trembling fingers, I dialed Janice's number. She picked up on the second ring. Beatrice, is that you? Your voice sounds strange. Where are you calling from? Janice. I said, my voice low and urgent. I need you to listen to me very carefully. I don't have much time. I'm on a cruise, and I think Julian is trying to kill me. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then Janice, ever the professional, snapped into action. Tell me everything. From the beginning. I spoke for 20 minutes, pouring out the whole sordid story. The silence, the invitation, the strange tease, the symptoms, the notes from Katerina, the digoxin, the talk of Sarasota. I told her about the photos and the voice recorder. She listened without interruption, the only sound her pen scratching furiously on a legal pad. Okay, Beatrice, she said, when I was finished, her voice grim and steady. Here's what you need to do. Do not confront them. Do not let them know you suspect anything. You are in the most danger right now when they think their plan is working. Your goal is to get off that ship safely. Record everything you can. And Beatrice, do you have your will with you? No, of course not, I said, confused. Has Julian ever asked for a copy? A cold dread washed over me as I remembered. About 6 months ago, I whispered. He said he was doing his own estate planning and wanted to see how ours was structured. I emailed him a copy. I could hear Janice let out a long, slow breath. Of course he did. He knows he's the sole beneficiary. Beatrice, I need you to stay strong. Get the evidence. Get home. We'll handle the rest. Just as we were hanging up, I heard a key in my door. I shoved the burner phone under a cushion and spun around just as Serafina walked in, carrying a small, elegant shopping bag. I found the most beautiful scarf for you in town, she said, her smile as bright and empty as the Bermuda sky. Julian is just paying for a taxi. She placed the bag on the chair and then sat opposite me. Her posture perfect, her hands folded demurely in her lap. How are you feeling? She asked, her eyes scanning my face. A little better, thank you, I said, my heart still racing from the phone call. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. You know, Beatrice, Julian and I have been talking. We really think it's time to start planning for your future long term. We want to help with everything, your medical care, your legal affairs. It might even be prudent to transfer some of the house documents in advance, just to simplify things down the road, to keep you safe. Pew. My fingers dug into the armrest of my chair. To keep me safe. The audacity of it was breathtaking. She reached into her own purse and pulled out a familiar manila envelope, thicker this time. These are just some preliminary forms for you to look over. Nothing final, of course. Just some drafts to get the process started. She laid the envelope on the table between us, a ticking time bomb disguised as paperwork. No pressure at all. Just look at them when you have a moment. She stood up, smoothed her linen dress, and glided out of the room. The envelope sat on the table, radiating a palpable malice. That evening, I dressed for dinner with the grim determination of a soldier preparing for battle. The voice recorder was in place, the photos were secure. I slipped the new envelope of documents into my tote bag. If they were going to make a move, I would be ready. At the table, Julian had already poured me a glass of red wine. I accepted it with a nod, then placed it just to the side of my plate, letting it breathe. I could feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting. But for the first time, I was watching back. And this time, I was recording. Dinner was a tense, surreal affair. Julian and Serafina kept the conversation light, talking about their plans for a kitchen renovation. But there was an undercurrent of nervous energy. The waiter brought the now customary pot of chamomile tea and placed it beside my setting. Serafina's hand hovered near it, but she seemed hesitant to pour, as if waiting for a cue. I decided to give her one. I leaned back in my chair, feigning weariness. "You know," I said, my voice soft, "I was looking at those papers you gave me earlier, Serafina. It all seems so complicated." This was the opening they had been waiting for. Julian immediately set down his fork. "It's not complicated at all, Mom. It's just standard estate planning. It's actually much easier to handle these things proactively before things get difficult." "He's right," Serafina chimed in, her voice earnest and reassuring. She finally poured the tea, her movements slow and deliberate. "We don't want to burden you with any of this. The goal is to give you peace of mind, knowing that everything is taken care of, that you're in good hands." The phrase hung in the air, "in good hands." "I do appreciate the thought," I said, mustering the most convincing smile I could. "I'll give them a proper look tonight." I cupped the warm mug in my hands, letting its heat seep into my fingers, and held it there for the rest of the meal, a prop in my own life or death drama. The tiny red light on the voice recorder in my pocket was a secret, silent witness to it all. Back in my room, I finally opened the envelope. Inside was a sheaf of legal documents, a durable power of attorney, a healthcare proxy property transfer, deeds for my house, and the bookstore bank authorization forms. Little yellow sticky tabs marked all the places where my signature was required. The language was cold, precise, and absolute. It would grant Julian complete control over every aspect of my life and my assets. It would, in effect, erase me. The final document was a pre-written letter addressed to Janice, informing her that I was willingly consolidating my estate under my son's care and that her services would no longer be required. I placed everything neatly back in the envelope. I didn't rip it up. This was evidence. This was their confession written in their own hand. Just after midnight, I met Katerina one last time on the crew deck. She looked pale and scared. She pressed a small flash drive into my hand. "My friend got the footage," she whispered. "It's not perfect, but it's enough. It shows her slipping the vial into your tea in the lounge. It shows him at the pharmacy. It shows her putting the envelope under your door. It's all there." I didn't know how to thank her. Words felt inadequate for the magnitude of what she had done. I simply nodded my eyes, conveying the depth of my gratitude. As I walked back to my cabin, the flash drive clutched in my hand, I felt the last vestiges of fear fall away, replaced by a cold, diamond-hard certainty. I had everything I needed. The pretending was over. It was time to write the final act. The final sea day dawned gray and overcast. The sky, a lid of bruised pewter pressed down on a slate-colored ocean. A stillness had settled over the ship, a collective weary sigh as we sailed back toward home. But inside me, a quiet storm was gathering force. There was no more doubt, no more confusion. I had photographs, I had recordings, I had documents, and I had the damning footage on the flash drive. I had a timeline of my own poisoning. I dressed with deliberate care as if preparing for a board meeting. A navy blue silk blouse, tailored gray slacks with deep pockets, and my late husband's old reassuringly heavy watch on my wrist. I packed my tote bag with the precision of a prosecutor preparing for trial. The manila envelope with the unsigned legal forms. The notebook filled with my meticulous chronicle. The photographs from Katerina. The voice recorder. And the flash drive which I had tucked safely inside an old mint tin. I was ready. At 10 o'clock, I made my way not to the dining room or the library, but to the ship's administrative offices on the main deck. I asked the woman at the reception desk if I could have a private word with the ship's security officer. She looked surprised, but my calm demeanor and respectable appearance worked in my favor. A few minutes later, a man in a crisp white uniform with sober, intelligent eyes introduced himself as Officer Kendrick. He led me into a small windowless conference room. The air was cool and smelled of industrial cleaner. He sat opposite me at a polished mahogany table, his hands folded, his expression a professional blend of politeness and skepticism. I did not begin with accusations or hysterics. I began by placing the flash drive on the table between us. "Officer Kendrick," I said, my voice as steady as the ship itself. "I have reason to believe that 2 passengers on this vessel, my son and daughter-in-law, have been systematically drugging me for the duration of this cruise with the intent to incapacitate me and seize control of my assets." I spoke for half an hour. I laid out the story in a clear chronological fashion, presenting each piece of evidence as I went. I showed him the photographs. I explained the contents of the voice recordings. I handed him the unsigned power of attorney forms. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I simply presented the facts, my tone as measured and objective as a news report. Kendrick's expression shifted from polite skepticism to focused attention, then to visible shock. He picked up the flash drive. "May I take this to the ship's captain and our chief medical officer?" he asked, his voice now laced with a new gravity. "Of course," I said. "I would also appreciate it if you could use the ship's secure line to contact my attorney in Portland. Her name is Janice Albright." I gave him the number. After he left, I did not go back to my cabin. The thought of being in that confined space was unbearable. Instead, I went to the ship's library, a quiet wood-paneled room at the stern, and sat in a high-backed chair overlooking the wake. I waited. 2 hours later, as I was pretending to read a novel, Julian appeared at my side. His smile was stretched thin across his face. "Mom? There you are. We've been looking everywhere for you. Come, let's have some lunch on the upper deck. It's the last day, we should enjoy it." I stood and followed him. A lamb being led, he thought, to the slaughter. At their usual table, Serafina was waiting, a pitcher of iced tea already on the table. She looked radiant in a soft pink sundress, the picture of innocent beauty. Her eyes, however, darted to my tote bag, which I placed carefully on the empty chair beside me. We were halfway through a plate of flavorless sandwiches when 2 uniformed crew members approached our table. They were not waiters. They addressed Julian and Serafina by name. "Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, the captain requests a brief word with you in his office." Julian's smile faltered. "Now we're in the middle of lunch. It's a matter of ship protocol, sir," the crewman said, his tone polite but firm. "It won't take long." Their composure finally cracked. I saw a flash of pure panic in Serafina's eyes before she masked it with a look of mild annoyance. Julian placed his hand on my shoulder. "We'll be right back, Mom." I watched them walk away, flanked by the 2 crewmen. I did not move. I calmly picked up the pitcher of iced tea, the one I had watched the waiter deliver, and opened myself and poured myself a glass. I drank it slowly, savoring the simple, clean taste. The breeze was cool on my face. 30 minutes passed. Then Officer Kendrick returned to my table. He did not sit. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and formal. "Could we speak again?" He led me to a different room, this time a more official office, with the cruise line's corporate logo on the wall. "The ship's doctor has reviewed the footage," he said, getting straight to the point. "While he cannot make a definitive diagnosis without a blood test, the evidence is highly suggestive of malicious intent. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling are being questioned separately. They are not under arrest, but they have been asked to remain in their cabins for the remainder of the voyage. We will be met by port authorities in Boston tomorrow morning." He paused. "Do you wish to press charges?" I thought for a long moment. "Not yet," I said. "First, I need to get home. I need to speak with my lawyer, but I want a full report of your investigation sent to her." He nodded, a look of profound respect in his eyes. That evening, the final night of the cruise, was the farewell reception. I sat alone at a table for one and watched the other passengers toast their vacations. Katerina passed my table once, refilling water glasses. Our eyes met. She gave me the smallest, almost imperceptible nod of solidarity. It was all I needed. Back in my cabin for the first time in days, I slept. A deep, dreamless, uninterrupted sleep. The storm had broken. The next morning, as the ship sailed into Boston Harbor, under a heavy gray sky, I stood on the deck with my small suitcase and my tote bag. I had already spoken with Janice again. She confirmed that Julian had indeed contacted her office weeks earlier, inquiring about how to amend my trust if I were to become incapacitated. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. At the farewell reception, I had arranged with Officer Kendrick to say a few words. I stood at the microphone looking out at the crowd. Julian and Serafina were there standing against the back wall, their faces ashen. They had been required to attend. I started by thanking the crew for a memorable journey. Then my tone shifted. This trip, I said, my voice ringing with quiet authority, has been a profound reminder that a person's true character is revealed not in grand declarations, but in the small, quiet choices they make when they believe no one is watching. I spoke about integrity, about the courage it takes to speak truth in the face of deceit. I never mentioned them by name. I didn't have to. Someone on this crew, I continued, chose to act with honor to protect a stranger at great personal risk, and I believe such courage should be rewarded. I called Katerina to the front. She was stunned, her face a mixture of confusion and fear. I handed her an envelope. What no one here knows, I told the crowd, is that my late husband and I established a small foundation years ago to support women pursuing careers in science and medicine. This envelope contains a full scholarship for Katerina's final year of pharmacy school, including all tuition and living expenses. She stared at me, her eyes filling with tears. She hugged me a fierce, trembling embrace before disappearing back into the crowd. I stepped down from the platform. My eyes found Julian and Serafina. They stood frozen, like statues of shame, forced to witness the public honoring of the woman who had single-handedly destroyed their monstrous plan. Their punishment had begun. It was not a punishment of law, not yet. It was the punishment of exposure, of watching the woman they had written off as a frail, confused victim reclaim her power, her narrative, and her life right before their eyes. 3 weeks later, I sat in Janice Albright's sun-drenched office in Portland, the familiar scent of old books and leather polish a comforting anchor. The stack of documents on her polished desk was a testament to the quiet, efficient work we had done since my return. The day I got home, I had a locksmith change every lock on my house. The next day, a security company installed discreet cameras around the perimeter. I was taking no chances. Janice slid the final page across the desk for my signature. We had systematically dismantled and rebuilt my entire estate. Julian's name and Serafina's had been excised with surgical precision. They were no longer my healthcare proxies, no longer the executors of my will, no longer beneficiaries of any trust or policy. The house upon my death would be donated to a local historical society. The bookstore, my life's work, would be transferred to a community foundation with a legally binding charter to preserve it as an independent bookstore in perpetuity. My personal assets would fund the foundation and expand the scholarship program that was now putting Katerina through school. The cruise line's full report came in, Janice said, tapping a thick binder. It's damning. Combined with the recordings and their prior inquiries to my office, we have more than enough to press criminal charges for attempted murder. No, I said, my voice firm. Not yet. I want this binder kept in your secure vault. It's my insurance policy. My life is not going to become a circus of courtrooms and headlines. My revenge will be quieter, more complete. My revenge was to live and to live well. I went back to the bookstore. My assistant manager, a bright young woman named Cora, had kept things running perfectly. I didn't retake the reins completely. Instead, I started mentoring her, teaching her the art of the business, preparing her for the day it would be hers to guide under the foundation's care. One afternoon, a woman in her 50s, who had been browsing the travel section, approached me. "Excuse me?" she said tentatively. "I know this is strange, but were you on the Azure Voyager cruise to Bermuda last month?" I nodded. Her face broke into a warm smile. "I thought so. I was there. I was in the lounge when you gave that speech. I just wanted to tell you I've never forgotten it." She didn't ask for details. She just placed a hand over her heart for a moment, a gesture of silent understanding, and then she left. The stillness of my house, which had once felt like a hollow ache of loneliness, now felt like a sanctuary of peace. It was mine again entirely. I deleted the one voicemail Julian had left me the day after the cruise ended. His voice was tired, defeated, weaving a pathetic story about how things had been confusing and how they only wanted what was best for me. I didn't need to hear the lies a second time. Months later, a thick, intimidating envelope arrived from a law firm in New York. Julian and Serafina were formally challenging the revisions to my trust. Their claim was audacious. They alleged undue influence, suggesting that I had been manipulated by a third party on the cruise and that my advanced age and fragile health had made me susceptible to coercion. I didn't even feel a flicker of fear. I simply called Janice. She let out a short, dry laugh. "Let them try," she said. Her response was a masterwork of legal annihilation. It included a copy of the cruise line's investigation's sworn affidavits from Officer Kendrick and 2 other crew members' transcripts of my voice recordings, and a forensic analysis of the documents they had prepared for me to sign. 2 weeks later, a second, much thinner envelope arrived. It was a formal withdrawal of their claim. The final line read simply, "This matter is now resolved." That weekend, I hosted a small poetry reading at the bookstore. Maris, who insisted I call her by her first name, now drove down from her university. She looked stronger, more confident. She brought me a small jar of loose-leaf tea. The handmade label read, "Beatrice's Blend, safe and strong." We sat in the corner sipping tea that tasted of peppermint and resilience, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt my entire body exhale. Life settled into a new rhythm, a clearer, more intentional one. I donated half the furniture in my house, keeping only the pieces that held true meaning. I took down the old family portrait from above the fireplace and replaced it with a framed piece of calligraphy I'd commissioned. It was a simple quote. "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." I never heard from Julian or Serafina again. I heard through a distant family acquaintance that they had sold their house and moved to a small town in the Midwest, their ambitions apparently curtailed. I sometimes wondered if the poison they had intended for me had instead seeped into their own lives, corroding their relationship from the inside out. But the thought was fleeting. I had no more room in my life for their ghosts. One evening, sitting by the window in my favorite armchair, the one with the ripped arm that reminded me of Richard, I opened my old notebook, the one I had taken on the cruise. I turned to a fresh page and wrote a single sentence. "You outlived the poison. Now live like you never drank it." The world didn't need to know the intimate details of my ordeal, but I needed to remember the woman I had become in the crucible of that betrayal. A woman who, when handed a cup of poison with a loving smile, had the clarity and the strength to set it down, and in doing so, saved not just her life but her very self. For legal reasons, and to protect the privacy of those involved, all names and locations in this story have been changed. I truly wonder if you were in my shoes. What would you do? Would you choose silence to maintain the peace, or would you dare to face everything to regain your voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story can become a candle that lights the way for someone else. For now, on the final screen, I'll leave 2 of the channel's most beloved stories. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.